Dr. Caitlin Wells. I am an assistant professor in fish, wildlife, and conservation biology here at CSU. So I'm a conservation biologist and a behavioral ecologist, which means I'm really interested in how the environment impacts animal behavior. So some of the topics that I research are related to why some animals, like golden-mantled ground squirrels, the species that I've studied for the longest here in Colorado, why they live by themselves instead of in groups like a lot of other animals, including a lot of other ground squirrels. So that's some of the more biology that I'm interested in. But in terms of conservation, a lot of the environment that animals are experiencing are being changed by people. So we're converting habitats that they might have used before to human purposes like agriculture or development. We have a lot of road networks and tend to kill them directly as roadkill, unintentionally. And then of course, climate change that is impacting how a lot of animals are experiencing their environment, especially hibernating species like ground squirrels.
I'm Cory Williams, and I'm an associate professor in the Department of Biology. I study squirrels in the wild, specifically up in northern Alaska. I studied the Arctic ground squirrel, and we've been doing a long-term study there for the past 30 years. We're really interested in how these squirrels are being impacted by climate change, specifically looking at how their annual timing is being affected by climate change. We also study squirrels in the lab, and for this we've got two main questions. The first is we're trying to understand the neuroendocrine mechanisms that control seasonal timing in these animals. And the second area of interest is understanding how these animals become obese and then suddenly shut off their appetite and switch to becoming anorexic. So both tree squirrels and ground squirrels belong to this bigger group, which we call the marmotini. Also includes your marmots and your prairie dogs. And their name is pretty descriptive. So the ground squirrels, you find them on the ground and then they go into burrows. And the tree squirrels are mostly up in the trees, highly arboreal. And they tend to nest up in the trees as well.
That's not to say that ground squirrels won't ever climb a tree. They totally will, especially if it gives them a higher little perch to look out for predators. But they are different groups of squirrels.
One of the big differences, though, is that the ground squirrels will hibernate during the winters, whereas the tree squirrels don't hibernate. And so even if you see tree squirrels a lot less, that's because they're spending a lot more time in their nest where it's warm, but they're not hibernating.
Here on campus, we have the eastern fox squirrel, or just fox squirrel, that is a tree squirrel that do really well in urban settings. They feed on a lot of seeds, a lot of oak acorns. They do really well around people because they're not too scared and they easily habituate to the presence of people.
Okay, so here we've got a fox squirrel, and these are the squirrels that you find on campus that were introduced to Fort Collins area about 100 years ago. And one of the other squirrels that you'll see up in Colorado are Aber squirrels, sometimes called tassel-eared squirrels. This guy's a little bit rough, but you can see he's got these big tufts off of the ears. And this is a melanistic squirrel, so it means it's got this really dark plumage. You'll also find Aber squirrels that have much lighter fur than this out there. And then a third type of squirrel that you see in Colorado are red squirrels. So they're smaller, and sometimes they vary quite a bit, so they can be much redder than this. And up in more northern populations, they'll be quite a bit larger as well.
So squirrels play several different roles in ecosystems. They're small mammals, 200 grams or so, like potato size, the golden-mantled ground squirrels that I study here in Colorado, and everything eats them.
So there's a whole variety of predators that consume squirrels. So a lot of raptors, owls, and then a lot of mesocarnivores. So things like foxes, badgers, coyotes.
So if you like carnivores, they're most likely going to be eating squirrels and surviving because squirrels are present in the ecosystem. If you like flowers at high elevations, then you can probably thank a ground squirrel for moving seeds from one place to another and aerating the soil through their digging and burrowing to increase nutrient cycling in the soil and helping that flower grow. So they're just so important for a lot of the high elevation ecosystems that we care about in Colorado, that they're valuable for those reasons, and then they're just really interesting in their own right. So the question of how are animals adapting to climate change is something that many people are studying, and we're just starting to piece it together for a lot of species, including ground squirrels. So the benefit of studying one population of golden-mantled ground squirrels, as I have, and with my PhD advisor now for 35 years, we have a lot of information about how they've been doing over time, including the past decade or two when things have gotten really warm and dry in Colorado.
Most squirrel populations are not threatened, but some of them are being impacted by climate change, and this has downstream effects. So, for example, there's so many predators that rely on these ground squirrels. This means that their juveniles that they're producing are now available in the environment earlier, and so potentially impacting the predators that rely on them. So one of the most surprising things I've learned about squirrels through my research is that they're being impacted by climate change, but the sexes are being impacted in different ways. So in the case of the Arctic ground squirrels, what we're seeing is that with warming, females are ending hibernation earlier, but males are not showing the same pattern. And so one of the things we're concerned about is whether you're going to get this essentially mismatch between the sexes in terms of their seasonal timing. So in general, males end hibernation much earlier than females, and they do this because they have to go through puberty each year. And so they need to be ready to mate when females emerge to the surface. And with continued warming, we expect that those males aren't yet going to be ready to mate when those females are emerging.
So one of the fun things about studying squirrels for almost 17 years now is that I'm always learning something new and surprising. So in terms of research, one of the cool things that we discovered at my field site is that sisters do not get along. So like many other mammals, male ground squirrels tend to disperse away from where they were born, but females tend to stay where they were born, and that means they interact with their moms, aunts, grandmothers, nieces, all kinds of female relatives in and around their home range. And those relationships are really interesting and mostly positive. So they might live by themselves, have their own burrow, raise a litter alone, but they're interacting with those other relatives mostly in positive ways, except for sisters. So mother-daughter interactions, beautiful. They'll eat lunch together, nibbling flowers on a rock at the same time, in the same place, no problem. Grandmothers, granddaughters, nieces, aunts, great. But littermate sisters, those who are born in the same litter, just fight. One of my favorite fun facts about squirrels is that they have, the ground squirrels that I study, is that they have almost these built-in sunglasses. So if you've ever been skiing in the mountains in the winter with snow on the ground, there's a lot of glare. It's really hard to see. And it's true for small animals too. So they have these built-in lenses that filter out a lot of that intense radiation at 10,000 feet so that they can still scan for predators and not get blinded by that intense sun.
I think the thing that's most interesting to me is the Arctic ground squirrel, because when they hibernate, their core body temperature drops to -2 Celsius. So that's below the freezing temperature of water. And they'll be at that low temperature for up to 3 weeks at a time. And so that's the coldest temperature ever measured in a mammal.
I'd say there are a few things that people can do to directly help keep more squirrels alive. For the ground squirrels and tree squirrels, no matter where you are, not feeding them is a great first step. We don't want them to get used to human foods, expect human foods, and stop foraging on their own naturally.
It's preserving habitat that is most important. So there's a couple of types of tree squirrels, for example, that are threatened, and it's ensuring that they have sufficient habitat, and then there's also connectivity amongst habitat so that they can disperse.